After analysing and theorycrafting starter kits for almost 2 years now, Cyrene's kit at first glance is one of the most mind-boggling kits I've ever seen. I think for the first time, some of the people doom posting to actually have some valid points I agree with, but at the same time, a little bit of it is overblown as well, and hence I'll be going over exactly how good Cyrene is, her meta relevance, how to build her Eidolons, how to use her properly, and so on. Cyrene's kit is all about her ultimate. The rest of the kit doesn't really do much. It can literally be summarized into 40% damage boost if you have 180 speed and 24% true damage from her skill. This is because the buffs that she can give with her ultimate are just that strong. However, she only provides unique buffs for Hoyoverse. Hence, using her outside of such teams will already reduce Cyrene's performance drastically. This is where the kit starts to get a bit long-winded. I'm going to try and speedrun it. She has 14 unique buffs in total depending on which Hoyoverse you use it on. Midi's buff allows him to use Godslayer without any charge at any point in time, and he also gains 200% crit damage for this attack. Not sure why it removes crowd control debuffs, but damage wise this is still an insane buff for Midi. Venom gets 6 core flames, 15% crit damage for each core flame in excess, so always 36% pre-E6, 16% crit rate, 50% additional damage for each attack, but the most important part is that Finon's transformation will not end, but instead refreshes, allowing you to play him in his ultimate forever until he loses all his HP. It does come at the cost of 15% of his current HP, but with Dunhing PT and the self-healing, you can actually just kind of go forever. I quite like Casseris's buff as well. Damage-wise, it's not going to be as big as Mayday or Finon, but it allows for a lot more flexibility when playing Casseris because she can now keep Overflow New Bud up to 200%. For each 1%, the bounce attack's damage multiplier increases by 0.24, and if there are 2 enemies or fewer, further increases by 0.48, meaning a maximum of 112% per bounce at 200% New Bud. The reason why Casseris was hard before was because any New Bud gained over 100% is just damage wasted. So you have to min-max Casseris ultimate, and that was where a lot of the skill expression came from, which you may have seen in my Epoch run. It's now a lot easier to play Casseris for the casual player, and if you need to clean up the remaining enemies like Filmweaver and so on, Casseris does more damage the fewer enemies there are as well. This reduces a lot of the clunkiness when playing Casseris, which is probably her biggest weakness. By next time he recovers a skill point and takes action immediately. The next time he uses his basic attack or skill, all erudition units attack increase by 60% and skill damage increase by 40%. The biggest reason why it's so strong is because Annexa's skill bounce now increases by 3, so from 5 to 8 until the end of his turn. So if you time it well with Saridra, you can actually get 32 bounce attacks in a row. Super broken. Cypher's buff is kinda sad, increases her damage by 36%, decreases the defense of the Patron by 20% and non-Patron by 12%, so kinda nothing. Iglea's buff is decent, it immediately stacks Garment Maker's speed to max. The next time Iglea or Garment Maker attack, they regenerate 70 energy and permanently gain 72% damage and 36% defense ignore as long as her ultimate is active. The thing is, stacking Garment Maker's speed to max is actually just kinda useless before Cyrene's E2, and the extra energy can cause Iglea to suffer from more buff uptime issues which she already had before since her speed is so high. Yassine's buff is also kinda meh, and like Casseris, most likely because they are trying to tone down full remembrance teams. Yassine is Cyrene's best support for reasons I'll get to later, but she gains 2 stacks of Ode to Sky, and whenever Yassine not Ika provides healing, it counts as 72% more for Ika's attacks and consumes 1 stack when Ika does use the attack. This does not mean more charges, more healing or whatever, it just means more damage for little Ika. Chibi's buff is also kinda whatever. She ignores 12% defense, and when she launches a follow-up attack, she can trigger 1 more additional damage. Sounds decent on paper, but it's almost always better to use Cyrene's buff on other units. Hyacinth's actually has a very good buff, but due to the nature of the team, it can be quite hard to actually make use of it. After receiving the buff, Hyacinth's next attack will regenerate 60 energy for her, and in this battle increases her damage by 120%, and she gains a mini Kafka duty proc. A basic attack can proc 60% of duties, and a skill can proc 80%. Savitra's buff is also decent, allied with military merit gains 30% crit damage, whatever, but more importantly, gains 1 charge after Kutima, so faster stacking for units like Annexa and Finon. Dunhing's buff is also not entirely game-breaking, 24% damage for the Bondmate, and each enhanced Soul Dragon now also deals 80% of the Bondmate's shield effect, not their attack. This is active even if you don't use the buff on him, so I guess that's acceptable. If you do use it on him though, Dragon immediately action advances and gets one attack without consuming the ultimate stacks, and also provides 150% of the original shielding. Ebonite's buff is actually really strong. The 18% damage for Evie and 1 extra memorial each. Skill or ultimate is quite meh, but she further increases the crit damage boost from her skill by 12%. So it was originally 24%, now it's 36%. In Remembrance teams that Ebonite wants to be played in, it's a massive crit damage buff for all the member sprites. Trailblazer gains attack equal to 16% of Cyrene's HP and then increases their crit rate by 72% of Cyrene's, and after Trailblazer uses that cool new enhanced basic attack, Cyrene's member sprite will immediately use her skill. Finally, for Cyrene herself, she applies it automatically when she uses her ultimate or summons her member sprite, which will happen concurrently for the first ultimate. She will gain 1 story. At 3 story, her member sprite immediately attacks, the same attack from the Trailblazer buff, and for each ally that gave her recollection, she further deals 60% additional damage as bounce. Like I said, because using her ultimate for the first time also summons her member sprite, that gives 2 story in 1 action. So for the first ultimate, she only requires 2 stacks to use this attack, but from then on she will require 3 ultimates. And that's it. That was kinda long, oh my god. So yes, Cyrene does have some really good buffs for the Chryso Heirs. She just has one major problem. She takes forever to get her ultimate. In the live stream, what was mentioned is that each ally action grants a stack. This is not completely true. Each time Cyrene takes her turn, the whole team gets a stack of future. And when you take an action with this stack of future, it will consume this stack and grant Cyrene 1 recollection, which is the stack needed for her ultimate. This means if you take multiple actions in a row before Cyrene's second turn, it is still only 1 stack of recollection. And because you need 24 stacks to use her first ultimate, it's an absolute nightmare and puzzling design choice. Each buff from her ultimate only requires 12 stacks, but the first ultimate must use 24 stacks. Why? I don't know, but being able to give 1 buff at 12 first is always going to be way better and more comfortable, more flexible. She just regenerates the entire team's ultimate the first time she uses her own, but that still doesn't really solve the issue of her slow stacking. To make things worse, Cyrene gains extra recollection at the start of the battle based on only Chryso Heirs or Remembrance units in their team, excluding herself up to 6. And Memo Sprites do not consume future, hence only Memo Sprites can take multiple actions in a row and still provide stacks. Because of a high cost for her first ultimate, stacks based only on Chryso Heirs or Remembrance units, and only Memo Sprites being able to stack multiple times in a row, it heavily limits Cyrene's team building options and effectiveness. The reason why this is so frustrating for me is because she could have easily been able to buff at 12 stacks, or maybe Chryso Heirs don't lose their future stack just like Memo Sprites. The solution would have been very simple. They can also just reduce the ultimate required, the number of stacks required for ultimate. And from my experience analyzing Stereo Kits, the devs are not stupid. They know what they're doing, which is why it's quite blatant to me that this is intentionally done and there is no effective way to work around this weakness other than her E2. Okay, let me get this straight. The concept of a late bloomer unit is completely fine. The problem is that the context is Honkai Star Rail. The endgame content you can play, Pure Fiction, Apocalyptic Shadow, Memory of Chaos, and recently Anomaly Arbitration, they all reward you based on how fast you clear. So wasting an entire cycle or 150 action value just to get her ultimate is never going to do well, and the developers know this. And looking at Cyrene's Eidolon 2, when entering combat, gain 12 recollection points. Wow, the solution to the problem is conveniently locked behind 2 copies of the character. I personally absolutely detest this method of designing character kits. It's like working backwards rather than working forward. It's even more frustrating because Ebonite's kit, literally 1 patch ago, is working forwards. Sure, she's kinda niche, you need remembrance units and stuff like that, but she's so good at E0, and if you decide to get her E2, it builds on her base kit, and she becomes stronger. Probably the best value E2 in the game right now. But in Cyrene's case, it's like she was balanced around E2, and then they tried to take stuff away, and that's our E1 or E0. Cyrene's viability in the meta is already heavily limited to Chryso Heirs, but she can't even be used comfortably with all of them. How does that make sense? This would be less of a problem if not for power creep. The devs have gone on livestream to say that they will be toning down HP inflation and power creep. It's hard to believe what they say when teams like Casteris literally doubles the damage, the highest DPAV increase I've ever seen in the entire history of the game, and bosses gain millions of HP from their first appearance to now. At the very least, if you're super casual, or in longer fights like Pure Fiction, Anomaly, Arbitration, Cyrene's slow ramp up will matter less and less, so it's not the complete end of the world, but it still kind of sucks. It takes so long just to get her ultimate. At the end of the day, Cyrene's meta is completely dependent on clearing as fast as you can, which leads us to the theorycrafting part now. The biggest winners of Cyrene's release is obviously the full Remembrance team, Casteris, Evernight and Hyacin, followed by Evernight Hypercarry, Mayday Hypercarry, and finally by Agalea Hypercarry. Comparing E0S0 Cyrene to E0S0 3B for a full Remembrance team even without the action advance is almost a 20,000 DPAV increase. Really big. This is one of the few teams where Cyrene can get her ultimate very quickly, so her slow ramp up is not really a problem at all, which is probably why the buffs for Casteris, Evernight and Hyacin feel more toned down as compared to the other units like NXR and Mayday, who have completely game-breaking buffs. And even with E1-3B, E0S0 Cyrene still outperforms. I think that this is the biggest no-brainer. Cyrene has to be the best in slot here by a decent margin. If not, she is really just garbage. She already caters so much to Remembrance and doesn't have the same weakness in a Remembrance team. If she's not even the best in slot in her own team, the entire kit is just a complete failure. Evernight and Mayday Hypercarry also gains a huge increase in damage, unfortunately not enough for Mayday to compete with Evernight or Casteris in Cyrene team, which should be expected due to the nature of Cyrene's kit, but still is one of the biggest winners. You get so many Godslayers while also increasing Mayday's synergy with Hyacin, solving two of Mayday's issues at one go. Agalea is kind of a weird in-between. She gets a decent buff, but it's not as powerful as Mayday's or Evernight's. It might actually be better to use Hyacin over Dunheng just to get Cyrene's ultimate faster, but obviously there's less synergy between Agalea and Hyacin as compared to Agalea and Dunheng. I think this just really goes to show how good Hyacin is for Cyrene. All the top teams that benefit the most from Cyrene all use Hyacin. The teams that have great buffs but take too long to ramp up are Finon and NXR, while Hyacin is by far the worst user of Cyrene out of the ChrysOS because she must use Kafka. You could maybe use Hyacin here, but then you have 3 units that want to use their skill, and Cyrene does not provide any skill points with her enhanced basic attack, making the team very awkward to play. For Finon on average, it's slightly better than before, by 0.6%, but still worse than Sustainers if you replace Sunday with Cyrene. However, because Finon can stay in his ult indefinitely, the longer the fight is, the better Cyrene will perform. This is already almost like 400 action value though, so any longer than this is going to be quite rare. Pretty funny visual just to illustrate this. Before Cyrene's ultimate, the Finon team does 5000 DPAV, literally peanuts, and then after Cyrene's ultimate it shoots up to 71,000. But because the start takes so long and deals so little damage, it weighs down the average quite heavily. Same goes for NXR, averaged out it's a slight increase. Before Cyrene's ult is 12,000 DPAV, but after Cyrene's ult it's 64,000. The difference is actually insane, it's like night and day. So yeah, do not be mistaken, Cyrene's unique buffs are very strong and are game changers for the ChrysOS. The problem that I would like to reiterate is that it takes forever to get some of these buffs online. The teams that are able to stack the ultimate faster will always benefit the most from Cyrene. This is why Hyacin is Cyrene's best support, because she charges Cyrene's ultimate very quickly and can be used in quite a few different teams. So when is it worth pulling Cyrene? In my opinion, it's either you are heavily invested into Remembrance teams, or you have many different ChrysOS teams. If you do not have Hyacin, it really starts to become quite hard to justify getting her, but she will definitely be best in slot for longer game modes like Pure Fiction or Anomaly for units like Finon, NXR or Agalea. But once again, power creep is a thing, so it's still a pretty risky investment for an improvement you only really see in the longer run. As Casteris is quite popular, I imagine quite a lot of people will still have some reason to consider pulling Cyrene, and this is where we go into how to play, build, and invest into Cyrene. Firstly, the way you play Cyrene is quite obviously dependent on the team you're using her in. In a Remembrance team, you can even basic attack instead of using her skill for more recollection, because she already gains so much of it in such a team. In this Remembrance team, you can pretty much use any relic you want. Ideally, World Remaking Redeliverer for the extra HP percent and damage percent, or Xinfonia's the new Player Ornament can give more crit rate and speed boost, allowing Cyrene to hit 200 speed after using her ultimate. In this team, 200 speed on the first cycle is a lot less important because you already get enough recollection stacks to use ultimate, so you don't need 2+2 speed. But in teams like Phynon, Alexa, Galea, the only way I could use Cyrene's ultimate within the first cycle is by giving her 200 speed or Sprightly Von Wak for the start of the Battle Action Advance so that she can get 3 turns in the first cycle. In this playstyle or team, Cyrene must use the skill all 3 times for the extra recollection, or her ultimate is just going to take forever. Thankfully, using Dunheng, this is fairly doable because he's very skill point positive, and if you must, basic attacking with Phynon or Alexa is not entirely bad either. To summarize, if you already have 200 speed and Furious is kinda useless, Sprightly is not needed as well since you already get 3 turns. In these teams like with Alexa or Phynon, you can give her a planar ornament like Lushaka for more attack if you want. Fleet of the Ageless for team-wide attack boost in dual carry teams also work. Bone Collection or Arcadia for more damage, usually more viable at E1, or I guess Broken Kill or Penacony can also kind of work, but the lower priority choices. The problem is getting 200 speed without her signature light cone is very hard. Even with Memory's Curtain speed boost and 2+2 speed, you need quite a lot of substats to hit 200 speed. In such a case, you would run World Remaking Deliverer so that you get the damage boost for the team and the extra HP percent, and then you combine that with Sprightly so you get the 3 turns in the first cycle. Relic stats are thankfully a lot more straightforward than the Relic setup. Crit damage or HP percent body, always speed boots, ice damage or HP percent orb, and HP percent rope. HP percent main stats are only really an option to consider in Casteris teams because you have extra HP that Casteris can drain from, right? But honestly, you really get so many charges, and the extra HP percent, it's not going to charge that much faster, especially since in teams with Evernight, Cyrene can actually deal a ton of damage as well due to Evernight's buffs for Mammoth Sprites. For every other team though, the HP is usually useless, so it's almost always crit damage and ice damage orb to maximize her damage. By the way, Cyrene gets 50% crit rate during her ultimate, so maximum 50% crit rate in battle, and she requires at least 180 speed for the extra 20% damage boost. From then on, excess speed grants 2% rest spend up to 60, hence why speed is always the highest priority subset for Cyrene, especially since it can also help you hit the 200 speed breakpoint. This is why her signature gives 18% speed, even if the rest of the effects are quite average. It gives 10% vulnerability after her ultimate, and 16% crit damage after her Memory Sprite skill. If you have both, so after the first 2 Cyrene ultimates, both effects increase by 60%. The vulnerability is nice, but the crit damage is quite small. Extra rest spend would have made this icon a lot better, which is why her alternatives are pretty close behind. Memory's Curtain is about 3% worse, or about 3000 DPAV worse in a full Remembrance team. Victory in the Blink is also pretty good, but Cyrene can't use her skill after her ultimate, so just like Memory's Curtain, it will get worse the longer the fight is. The Flower Remembers and Stories Next Page are also decent options, but again, Memory's Curtain and Victory in the Blink are both free-to-play options already, so no reason not to use those unless you have no other choice. Finally, Cyrene's Eidolons. E1 is actually quite powerful. It turns Cyrene into a bit of a sub-DPS, but this is heavily dependent on how fast you can stack Recollection. Thankfully, it does give 6 stacks after each Memory Sprite skill, so it becomes a lot stronger for units like Mayday or NXR who are quite heavily reliant on getting as many of those buffs as possible. E2 I already mentioned gives 12 recollection stacks at the start of battle, but it also gives 24% extra true damage based on how many allies Cyrene has buffed. This will show a massive increase in non-Remembrance teams because those are the teams that you have an issue getting her ultimate to begin with, but even in a full Remembrance team, it's still a pretty good increase in damage. 40,000 DPAV, really good actually. E4 increases the number of bounce attacks from her Memo skill and gets better in a very long fight since it can stack up to 24 times. But it's not a huge improvement in a shorter scenario, so I don't like it that much. Finally, E6 gives Cyrene Robin's action advance for the first ultimate, 20% defense reduction and 24% action advance after the second Memo Sprite skill, so it functions very similarly to S5 Dance. Action advance is a very important stat that was missing from the rest of Cyrene's kit until now, and that is why it's the biggest DPAV increase, putting a Casteris and Evernight team at almost 200,000 DPAV for 3 targets. For vertical investment, like most supports, I recommend investing in your other damage dealers first, E2 Casteris, E2 Evernight, whatever, and so on before considering Cyrene's Eidolons. I do not think a full Remembrance team needs E2, it is probably currently the best team in the game by far. It can deal with 5, 3, and 1 to 2 targets now. E1 S0 maximum is a good stopping point, I would say, for Remembrance teams. For non-Remembrance teams, E2 become a lot more tempting. In those cases, if you really like your team or main, whatever, like E2 Finon, E2 Mayday, whatever, then yeah, it might be worth considering E2 Cyrene. That's pretty much it for my entire Cyrene guide. I'm going to leave the link of my theorycrafted sheet in the description. I might still do more. There's still some blanks. If you want me to, maybe consider looking at some teams, you can comment down below as well. If I have time, I'll do it. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you.